Hello and welcome to episode 156 of My Circus, My Monkeys. Most of you listening will have just or will soon be wrapping up the spring term. First, congratulations, you did it. The beginning of this year has 100% been ridiculously stressful and overwhelming, so you deserve kudos just for making it through. The next thing I want you to think about is during this semester, did you get the results you wanted? Now, this semester was a little unprecedented. And so I'm sure there were many unexpected things that you are still trying to sort out. But when you look at things that maybe weren't so topsy-turvy, things that you typically just do, did you get the outcomes that you and your team wanted? If you've been working your bleep off all semester and haven't gotten the results that you need, especially in areas that haven't really changed a ton, we're going to talk about one big thing that's probably getting in your way in today's episode. So stay tuned. At the end of this episode's title, I tacked on lessons from the sky. And I wanted to explain what I meant by that first. So, for the last 2 months or so, I've been watching many videos on YouTube from Mentor Pilot. And it is hosted by an actual pilot, Petar Hornfelt. And it's billed as the #1 channel for aviation incidents. Now, this all started when I came across a recent video about how the search for flight MH370 has resumed. You may know it. It's the one that was in Indonesia that seemingly just disappeared over the Indian Ocean. Well, I was interested in this YouTube video because I had watched the full Netflix documentary about it. So after I listened to that, I was compelled to watch other videos because Petar is really talented at breaking things down so anyone can understand exactly what happened. And that's true both from the standpoint of aviation, so flying planes, etc., but also human behavior. For example, he regularly discusses how stress impacts a pilot's ability to make good decisions, which I love digging into as well. And I do have the link to his website in the show notes if you'd like to take a peek, because I think they're kind of interesting. So, the reason I find it interesting is not really so much about the crashes or incidents, as he calls them, but I'm really intrigued by how people handle things when they go wrong, whether it be from the impact of stress, exhaustion, systems failure, or just some random occurrence. And the more I've listened to, the more I've picked up about how important effective systems and training are for people's success in any field. And I have a growing list of additional lessons from the sky episodes, but I want to start off first by talking about something I've covered before, this concept of autopilot. And I think you know this, but I'm absolutely not a pilot. I have no training in pilotry. um, but I just want to take the lessons that I've learned from Petar about flying and aviation and apply those to higher ed because I think they're on to something. So obviously, the term autopilot itself came from the aviation industry. I mean, pilot's right in the name. So let's start by breaking down, in simplistic terms, the goal of aviation. And generally speaking, that's to get a plane and its cargo and or passengers from one place to the other, right? And to do that, the pilots need to do a series of things to get there successfully and safely. And to make it easier on the pilot, plane manufacturers have developed autopilot settings to help fly the plane. After all, in specific situations, pilots need to do the same thing every time. So why not have a system that automatically does that for them? Because if the pilot had to remember and focus on doing every single thing for every single flight, their brains would already be fatigued. And then if something does go wrong, it would make it way more difficult for them to solve problems. So I've talked about your autopilot setting as being when your subconscious is in control. And if you recall from other episodes, you are on autopilot 95 to 99% of the time. Your autopilot settings have the same goal. If you had to totally focus on how to drive to work every day with your conscious brain, you'd have to use way more of your most valuable resource, which, if you remember, is your energy, simply to get to work. And that means less energy that you can use for other things, like when you get to work and have to start work. Your brain automates anything it thinks that you need to do repeatedly to survive. And that is a fantastic function if those things are correctly assessed to begin with. Your autopilot settings and the ones pilots use to help maximize energy for things that happen on a regular basis, because then we have energy left over to create and solve problems. But if an autopilot program is not aligned with the parameters necessary to achieve the goal, you and the plane are going to automatically do things that might get in the way of that goal. And that means if you don't know what your autopilot does in a certain situation, you don't know whether it's actually helping you or getting in the way of you getting to your destination, aka achieving your goals. Sometimes you or pilots need to get out of all autopilot settings and manually fly the plane, be in your conscious brain to get the best outcomes in a situation. But that absolutely requires more energy. And that's okay if it helps you get where you want to go. That's much better than defaulting to autopilot that isn't an autopilot setting, an autopilot program that isn't appropriate for a given situation. Okay. And we talk about this all the time with talent themes. So how is my adaptability showing up in a certain situation? Is it automatically helping me get the outcomes I want? Or is it actually getting in the way? Those are all autopilot. And in fact, when I first started watching Paytar's videos, I assumed that autopilot was just kind of one button that, like, oh, fly the plane now, boop. And I would picture that scene from the airplane movie where the autopilot just kind of inflates into the pilot seat, and then the real pilot can walk around and do whatever he wants or she wants. But it turns out there's not just one autopilot setting. There are different programs that a pilot can engage depending on what they need the plane to do. And I think this is helpful because, again, you're on autopilot 95 to 99% of the time, but it's not just one giant program that's continually running. It's actually a bunch of smaller, although often interrelated, programs. So think about your habits, systems, your brain synapses. And those are what drive your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So what you automatically do when a student comes into your office and asks a question might have different rules or parameters than if your partner or your child comes and asks you a question. And those are going to be completely different autopilot programs than the ones you have around getting to work or eating or perhaps not eating lunch. And I like this concept in part because thinking of your subconscious as one giant amorphous autopilot kind of feels overwhelming. If you know you're not getting the results you want, having to look at the entirety of your subconscious doesn't seem really feasible. I mean, where would you even start? And that can lead to decision paralysis. So you just keep doing what you've always done. But if we think about it in terms of multiple systems that are automated to help you navigate different situations, then the process becomes more manageable. Because first, you just identify which system, or multiple systems perhaps, are related to that issue. Then you dig in and start assessing, well, what part of that doesn't work? And if you're coaching your team on a regular basis, you might be helping others do this all the time. So let's say Fred mentions he's having issues getting reports done. You can ask something like, oh, interesting. Well, which of your talent themes do you think might be getting in your way here? And perhaps he reflects and says something like, well, I think my woo gets a little out of control, especially when students and parents come by. Like, I just want to connect with them so much that I run out of time during the day to finish my paperwork. And then you can help him with the last step, which is upgrading that autopilot setting he has around woo. So that way, when he's on autopilot, he gets better outcomes. He gets to woo, but he also gets the reports done. And I really want to emphasize that Petar doesn't just cover these incidents to lure people in and get more clicks. He covers these incidents to help instruct pilots on how to be better in the cockpit, but also to show the improvements that the aviation industry makes after each incident. Because the aviation industry is very thorough about investigating crashes or any incidents where there were injuries or damage to the plane, runways, etc. And he talks about this because there are often significant upgrades to software, such as autopilot settings, airplane design, training guidelines, rules for pilots, and any other system that's found to be faulty. When planes don't safely get to their destination, aka achieve their goal, there's always an investigation because no one wants anything like that to happen again. Because if you're flying a bunch of people and you crash, that is potentially deadly. In every video I've watched, the fault is almost never that a pilot or another party has simply been negligent. There are always faulty systems that run in the background that contribute to an incident. And when you fix those, when the aviation industry fixes those, they decrease the likelihood that individuals will make mistakes while they're running on autopilot. So same thing for you. When you fix those faulty systems, and not faulty as in your fault, just that they're not behaving like you need them to, then you cut out a lot of mistakes and you get where you want to go with very little effort. But let's talk about what happens when you crash. And if a plane crashes, there's a huge investigation. But what happens when you crash or your team? What happens when your autopilot settings keep you from getting to your destination, again, aka achieving your goals? And I'll add here, achieving your goals safely. So not achieving them at the expense of you and your team's health and well-being. Unless part of that involves hitting rock bottom in part or all of your life, humans typically don't investigate when they don't get the results they want. I typically keep doing the same thing over and over again and wonder what you're doing wrong. Or even worse, you wonder what's wrong with you. Or maybe you hope, gosh, I really hope something external changes so that things work out differently next time. Now, I've unknowingly suggested the idea of having multiple autopilot programs in the past, but I don't think I communicated it well. For example, when we talk about assessing how your talents show up as weaknesses, what I really mean is you have a specific autopilot program for your restorative or adaptability or woo. And when you look at how that autopilot shows up when you're trying to finish a project, and it's not going well, you can assess what's working and what isn't. That allows you to then upgrade that autopilot setting. Or one thing I talk about a lot is stories and beliefs. They are ingrained in your subconscious mind, and automatically, autopilot, your experiences or new information you're receiving get filtered through them. When you assess those stories, you can again discover whether these stories are working for you. Like if you have responsibility high, and here you can see again how these things overlap. You have stories that impact how that talent theme shows up. When you encounter something, if you have responsibility high and you encounter something that could or should be done, you probably automatically volunteer to do that thing because somewhere in your mind something's happening. You have a thought like, well, if I don't do it, no one will. Or if I don't do it, the students will suffer. And if that's all automatically happening for you, unless you have unlimited bandwidth, it's eventually going to catch up with you. Or let's talk about what everyone needed more of this spring: stress management and self-care. What is your autopilot program around taking care of yourself? What parameters have you set? When you look at your calendar, if you see there's at least 2 hours of open time, do you actually have lunch today? Or if you just see back-to-back meetings, which is when you need self-care the most, is it too bad, so sad for you? Or maybe you don't even have an autopilot program for self-care. And that means every time you think about it and try to do it, it takes loads of energy, which makes you even less likely to try it again. Now, I'm trying to break some of these parameters down in a way that you probably aren't even aware of with your own autopilot settings. And why am I doing that? Because these things are so deeply rooted in your brain and they're just automatically happening all the time. And so that's why it's so important. And that's why I'm always suggesting / encouraging you to assess what's going on. My guess is you don't know what you're doing in many situations because, oh, so many of us feel like we don't have time to reflect or investigate how our autopilots are showing up and whether they're effective. But your autopilot programs should not be a mystery. If it is, you're rarely going to get to the destination you were hoping for. Pilots know which autopilot settings do what and within what parameters, or at least they're supposed to. If the pilots get overwhelmed by what Petar calls increased workload, they may not even realize that some parameters have changed, which means they're assuming something's automatically going to happen that doesn't, or the thing that's automatically happening is no longer appropriate for the situation. And some incidents were actually called because manufacturers had made a change and did not communicate that there were new parameters to the pilot. Sometimes an autopilot setting isn't appropriate for every situation. And sometimes it makes the most sense to manually fly the plane. But the most important thing here that I want you to remember is that unless you know what outcomes a specific autopilot program is designed to accomplish, you're not going to know whether or not they are appropriate for the situation you find yourself in. Now, the title of this episode is Why You're Not Getting the Results You Want. If you're on autopilot 95 to 99% of the time, and you don't know what your autopilot programs are designed to do in various situations, there is an excellent chance you are not helping yourself get to your destination, at least not in a safe and effective way. First, you need to think about the positive outcomes that you and your team regularly achieve that you don't really have to think about. You know, the ones that feel easy for you. Those are the autopilot settings, the autopilot programs that are working for you. They might consist of individual habits, informal or formal procedures, or even institutional systems. That means when you and your team are working on autopilot, those rules and parameters are aligned with your goals. Even more importantly, you do not have to expend much energy to get the results you want. Bingo. Now, think about what maybe isn't working how you want. What goals or outcomes do you want that seem to elude you? Or even if you do manage to achieve them, it's taken way longer than you wanted and you and your team are exhausted from all the effort. Well, those habits, procedures, systems are not aligned with your destination. And what's worse, you're probably constantly spending your energy and time trying to solve problems and correct for almost every situation. Any wins you have are hard fought, and Quite frankly, they take so much energy that you and your team are left drained. PATAR covers quite a few incidents that eventually resolve without major injuries or damage to the plane, but only narrowly. And those situations are still investigated to make sure the chances of that happening again are as low as possible. Can you achieve your goals by constantly troubleshooting and correcting your course? Yes, but it's not something you can do on a regular basis, or you'll increase your workload to the point that you and your team will eventually crash, aka burn out. So, if you want to maximize you and your team's productivity, well being, and outcomes, you must make sure that your autopilot programs are aligned with the outcomes you want. Is this going to take more energy and time up front? Absolutely, because the conscious brain activities, just like manually flying a plane, require more focus and energy. But if you're not getting the results you want or need now, then you are already wasting tons of time and energy that you don't have. And you're wearing yourselves out without getting to your destination. It would be a far better use of your energy to just stop, assess, and start upgrading some of the things that simply aren't working. Continuing to do the same things over and over again without success is just going to leave you and your team frustrated and exhausted. If that in itself feels overwhelming, that is where Strengths University comes in. Alicia and I are Gallup certified strengths coaches and absolutely do training around Clifton Strengths. But that is just the tip of the Strengths University iceberg. We have developed an entire curriculum that guides you through how to better manage your energy, talents, stress, and team, including taking a hard look at the stories, habits, and systems. In other words, we help you reflect on your individual and collective autopilot programs so you can upgrade those and start getting the outcomes you want without even thinking about it. If you're listening to this episode in May of 2025, we would love to have you join us for the 2025 Summer Supervisor Strengths Institute. If you're listening to this at another time, we have an institute running every semester. And in the institute, you will get the structure and support you need to upgrade your productivity and well-being. And you can get more information with the link about the institute in the show notes. And until next time, stay strong.